I'd like to introduce Neal Myers. He is a member of the Olevenhain Water District, and he is a director for representing Olevenhain at the San Diego County Water Authority. And he has kindly agreed to come and tell us about what happened at the meeting related to the state water project and the tunnel in Northern California, which is so important to all of California to understand. So Neal, with that, let me turn it over to you. We are recording this meeting and it will be shared with who knows how many people before it's all said and done.
Well, thank you, Ann. I'm really happy to present. Yeah, so I've put together a PowerPoint, just trying to hit the highlights, provide some background about the project in general for those who aren't totally familiar with it or just want to be refreshed because it's gone through so many different versions over many, many, many years. And then I will get through to the point where we had the discussion at the Water Authority board meeting last month. And so, and please feel free for those who are on to jump in and ask any questions along the way. It's designed for that purpose. Or if I'm making some assumptions as to certain things that I talk about that just need better explanation, please let me know that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share. And can everybody see that okay? Okay, great. And so I do have start off, I am a lawyer, but I practiced for about 40 years, represented a lot of public agencies. My involvement with getting onto the other side of things, representing my division, I'm in Division 5 of the Olevenhain Municipal Water District. There was a vacancy that opened up about 3.5 years ago in Division 5. And applications were being accepted. So I thought this would be something kind of fun to do as I was winding down from 40 years of hard litigation to sit on the board. And so I put in my application and the board unanimously accepted me to be the new Division 5 director. It's a 4-year term. I'm actually up for election today. So, and it's a hotly contested one. So we'll see what happens on that. But this is, as Ann said, a good distraction as I'm waiting to find out what's going to happen with my votes. Since I've been on the board, I've really enjoyed the water and getting to know a lot about water policy. I was privileged at the board after me being on it for about a year, just selected me to become Olevenhain's representative on the San Diego County Water Authority. And for those that are, I think most of you are familiar with it, but it's a large body that basically so the Water Authority is a wholesale agency. Most of the agencies in San Diego County do not have their own source of water, or if they do, their source of water is limited. And so almost every agency purchases water from the wholesaler, which is the Water Authority. The board of the Water Authority is composed of representatives from each retailer. The city of San Diego dominates that board. It has 10 members because it purchases the most water. So I sit there with about a 3-point-something% vote on that board. And then they have different committees, and I've sat on the Imported Water Committee. I'm now vice chair of the Imported Water Committee. And because of that, I've learned a lot about imported water issues, including what's going on up at the Bay Delta. And I was privileged to go on a tour that the Metropolitan Water District gives of the Bay Delta about 2 years ago. So I've actually was up there and had a chance to see a lot of how all this works. For those of you who'd be interested in these MWD tours, they're offered. And if any of you are interested in that, or they actually have tours of the Colorado River, if there's openings, they're made available to folks. And so if you're interested, let me know. So the presentation here focuses on what many years ago was known as the peripheral canal. That's where it all kind of started, and then it's kind of moved on from there. I think what captured Ann's interest was a discussion that the Water Authority had last month, in which we invited 3 representatives from the Division of Water Resources, which is a state agency, which has been tasked by Governor Newsom to promote what is now known as the Delta Conveyance Project, a single tunnel that's proposed to run basically underneath the Delta, that is very controversial and has a lot of pros and cons. I do want to note here that I have this asterisk that I am a director, but my comments are my own, and I do not necessarily reflect those of the two agencies. And I want to say that, although I will be discussing what their policies are. So let me start with the first slide. And for the big picture, we need to understand the State Water Project. And so the State Water Project is a amazing system, really one of the largest water systems in the world. That's starting from way up in Northern California with Lake Shasta and some of the large reservoirs up there, supplies water to Northern California, and then through a series of intakes and pumps and reservoirs and the canal that when you're driving down the I-5, you see it going, and then the pumps that run it over the Tehachapi Mountains. Some of that water ends up in Southern California, starts with the Metropolitan Water District, and the San Diego County Water Authority purchases the water from MWD, and it ends up down here. Now, our water here in the San Diego region really comes from three sources. We get some of our water from the State Water Project. In a good year, when there's a lot of rain and they have a bunch of water up here, the water contractors will sell us up to 80 to 100% allocation of water, so we can buy a lot of water from here and not from the Colorado River where we get most of our water. In dry years, they can cut us off completely. So there'll be years where we get no water from the State Water Project. And that's part of the issue here we'll get to. This very expensive project, there'll be times when we get no benefit from it whatsoever. There'll be times when we don't need the benefits of the project because there's enough water already in the system. So this is the water project in general. And it delivers water to 27 million people, 1 in 12 Americans, which is an interesting statistic that they have. Lots of farmland. And a significant amount comes down to the Metropolitan Water District when it's needed. Now, the project that we had this discussion about is the Bay Delta, what is now called the Bay Delta Conveyance Project, and it is designed to divert water from the Sacramento River above the Delta and put it in a 45-mile, 36-foot diameter single tunnel buried about 150 feet underground with 11 shafts that will then at the other side, so here is where it starts, here's the Bay Delta, and the idea is to build this tunnel about 145 miles with these shafts to access it underneath the Bay Delta to come out on the other end, and that the water will then be pumped from the end here into the State Water Project. What we have now is that we have at this point pumps which pump the water at enormous quantities directly out of the Bay Delta. And that's how we get our water now. And so what that has had over many, many years is serious impacts on the environmental health of the Bay Delta. You've heard about the Delta smelt and other species. Most of the degradation, especially to a lot of the species, has been through this enormous pumping and sucking of water out of the Bay Delta itself. And part of the idea from the environmental point of view, at least the argument is, that by building this tunnel and accepting the water above the Bay Delta and bringing it underneath the Bay Delta here, you're no longer sucking a bunch of water, enormous amounts of water out of the Bay Delta, and you are going to significantly improve the Bay Delta environment by basically bypassing. The other benefit is that the size of this tunnel is such that they'll actually be able to convey more water. So it'll actually add more water to the system that will bring water down to the agricultural interests and also to the urban interests in Central California and in Southern California. This project has been very, very controversial for many, many years. I'm going to get a little bit ahead on this slide, but many of you may remember it was at one time called the Peripheral Canal, which was defeated in a proposition in the 1980s. Now, the difference between the Peripheral Canal and the tunnel project is it was going to be an open canal that was going to, as it said, go along the periphery of the Bay Delta and bring the water here as opposed to a tunnel. That was defeated. Then it was defeated, but it didn't mean that to a lot of people it still wasn't needed. So then they called it the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and various governors tried to get a variation of this and called it that. Then it was called the California Water Fix until 2019, and now it's called the Delta Conveyance, which Governor Newsom strongly supports and is really pushing to have this in process, approved, and money flowing before he leaves office. That's a big goal of his. It's a 20-year project. Right now, they're still in the permitting phase. They haven't started the design. If everything goes perfectly, it'll be complete in 2044. That's if everything goes perfectly. Right now, the projected cost in 2023 dollars is $20 billion with a B. And by 2044, with inflation and just dollars, even by the best estimate, it'll be a $20 billion project. And that's, again, if everything goes perfectly, and we'll talk about that. There's been a huge debate about this project, and it reflects really the very complex and conflicting interest involved in managing our California water resources. Pros and cons. I just kind of went through this morning and did some looking at, I pulled some of the information I have about kind of where the pros and cons of this project are. One of the major pro claims is reliability, that it's going to enhance the reliability of water supplies for consumers and agriculture. And a lot of that is based upon concerns of climate change and adapting to climate change. If the climate change projections are correct, and we get the sea rise that we think we're going to get, the Bay Delta environment is going to be seriously compromised. And there's going to be a lot of salty or brackish water that's going to be flowing up from the bay, San Francisco Bay primarily, into the Delta with a degradation of the quality of that water. If the quality of that water gets bad enough, the water that we're now pumping directly out of the Bay Delta is going to get bad. It's not going to be fresh anymore. And there is great concern that if we don't build a pipeline that's going to accept the water above the Delta that's fresh, that we could be in big trouble if all the predictions about sea level rise are correct. So it's a huge reliability issue from the point of view of a lot of people. Also, earthquake preparedness. Right now, the water that comes through the Bay Delta, when it is taken out through these huge intake pumps, goes into a levee system. That levee system is in disrepair. Much of the levees have sunk because of groundwater pumping from the agricultural interests. And if there is an earthquake, which everybody says there's going to be, and if it gets up into about the 7.0 area, there is a significant chance that those levees could be compromised. And if those levees are compromised, we could have serious problems with the reliability of water, and it could take a long time to get those levees back in shape. And the levees could be filled with, again, poor quality water that would take a long time to heal. So again, the argument is that having this pipeline that runs underneath, pipes are actually quite resilient to earthquakes, and that they would be in a much better position of staying together if that's built. part of the problem there right now is there's such a long timeline, 2040s at the earliest, this is going to be built, that there needs to be a significant amount of money still spent in keeping those levees in shape. And Ann, you may recall that was a part of the discussion that we had at the Water Authority level. So I've already talked about the Earthquake Preparedness Pro. The environmental benefits is a really interesting issue. You've got environmental groups that are in favor of it, and you've got environmental groups that are against it. The Sierra Club is against it, for example, but there are environmental groups that are that are in favor of it because of the benefits to native fish species and the degradation that's taken place through this pumping action. And then there's the economic benefits. There have been some studies that have been done that were presented last month, in which there is the belief by some economists that for every dollar spent on the project, there'll be a $2.20 return. The cons are the very high cost. $21 billion in 2022 dollars is a lot of money, and that assumes that everything runs perfectly. And we know from experience that a lot of times a $40 billion project can quickly become a 60 or 70 or $80 billion project. And we have some experience that I'll talk about in a moment. There are environmental concerns on the other side about the Delta's fresh water flows and taking more water from upstream that is going to have the impact on the flows and the amount of water that goes into the Delta system. There are concerns about who benefits. The Northern California interests, and it's always been a regional issue, that Southern California is stealing water from Northern California. And Southern California says, no, we're doing a really good job of conserving down here, but it's an economic benefit to the entire state for us to be able to have access to water. And then there's the issue of the agricultural interests and whether the ag interests are going to pay their fair share to the benefits that they're going to have from this extra water. We certainly just have the controversial history. And then there's also concerns about the impacts of the local communities. This project is going to be very disruptive to the local communities in and about the Bay Delta. And there are many local community groups who just don't want to have to deal with these impacts. Easy, huh? We'll get this figured out, huh? So who generally supports and opposes? The supporters, strong support from Governor Newsom. I was at a conference of the of what they call AQUA, which is the state basically water groups, where Newsom actually showed up unannounced and gave a 15-minute riff about how important it is for this to get approved before he's out of office. So he's putting a lot of pressure on state agencies to get the permitting going and get the funding going on this project. It's very important to him. So the water agencies are pushing it very hard to get this thing pushed through while the Newsom administration is going forward. Of course, the agriculture interests would be happy to see more water because they've been overdrafting and over pumping their groundwater for so many years. They need to find other sources so they can find more water. And if they can get the urban interests like us to pay for it, all the better. And then obviously business groups who believe that having a resilient water system that's being upgraded and modernized is important to our entire economic interests. For those who are opposed, certainly there are environmental groups. The Sierra Club has come out very strongly against it, along with sports fishing alliances and others who argue that it will harm the Delta's ecosystem and endangered species. Delta communities, Northern California interests, it goes back to the old argument about us, they want their water to be preserved up there and not what they use a water grab from Southern California and agricultural interests. What I call the better spent elsewhere-ers, which frankly, I kind of lean in that direction sometimes. This is an enormous amount of money, and can these resources should these resources be allocated differently? Certainly with some resources allocated to make sure the system up there continues to be in good shape and the levees remain in good shape, but can we spend that money in a better place? And public opinion generally opposes this tunnel project when they're asked in surveys. So what are the Southern California regional positions? So the Metropolitan Water District, which is the big gorilla up in Los Angeles, that the San Diego Water Authority is a member of, and we have about a 12, I think, or 14% voting interest at MWD, has generally supported that project and is helping to fund it because they do believe that they want to preserve that water reliability and make sure that they continue to have flows coming in from Northern California. Even at times when they don't really need the water so much, they want to preserve that. I see that support is starting to lessen a little bit because of the cost. The cost is so enormous, and the cost of that will be passed through to Southern California interest. Rates are already skyrocketing, and the cost of water and purchasing water by the acre foot from funding part of that $40 billion, along with the Sites Reservoir, which is another $8 to $10 billion project in Northern California. All those costs, no pun intended, trickle down to us. And so it really needs to be a project that is fair and equitable in terms of how the cost will be spread, so we don't pay an unreasonable proportion of that cost that benefits others. So generally, MWD is committed to funding its share of the project's environmental planning and pre-construction costs to date. There is a bill right now of over $100 million. I may be misstating that, but it's a lot of money that is being requested from MWD for design planning. And frankly, MWD doesn't have the money. They're almost broke. They can't fund their own projects, and they're losing their reserves because of the water sales right now being so low. Right now, historically, MWD is selling less water historically than it's sold in about 40 years. And because of that, their revenues are down. We're just not buying and using as much water anymore. The conservation has really been working. And so they're really looking at their bank accounts and saying, we don't know if we can really afford to fund this project in the way that we thought maybe we could help to fund this project in the past.
Neal?
Yes.
At the last MWD meeting, they did agree to fund the $140 million.
That has not been decided yet. And I think that there's going to be a vote coming up, and I think that vote is this month.
I thought it was this. I thought I read that in the minutes that or something. No, it was in the staff report. It was in the staff report to you guys after the October board meeting.
Well, maybe you're ahead of me on that then, and we'll see where that money came from. But I know that was something that we're very concerned about, that we're spending a lot of ratepayer money on this project, on a project that we don't know if it's even going to go forward or not.
Exactly.
And we're concerned that if we, it's one of those things, you start spending so much money on a project that it's almost too late to pull it back. And it becomes one of these projects that, well, we've spent so much money already, we can't stop.
Exactly.
And we're very concerned about that.
Would you tell everybody the percentage that MWD has agreed to add to the paying of the cost of the tunnel?
Right now they haven't. It could be as much as 50%.
Yeah.
And it may be, and that's for water we might need 20% of the time. Yeah. And so it really is one of these questions as to the cost benefit of it. Sure, we'd love to have that additional reliability, but what are the trade-offs and what are the costs? The San Diego County Water Authority has been evolving in its position on this project. And just at the last meeting, they've added some additional language to their position on the project, which is this quote that I have here: provide conveyance and storage facilities that are cost effective for the San Diego region's taxpayers and are proportionate to the benefits they receive, to improve reliability and quality of our water supplies and to protect the Bay Delta's ecosystem. This is under the policy area of the Bay Delta project. And we've added these next two bullet points are brand new that we've added, and that's to support the levee improvements, including modernizing the existing Bay Delta levee system, which has been ignored and underfunded for many, many years, that we still need for at least another 20 or 25 years before this project, even in a perfect world, is turned on. And then the need for us to emphasize the fact of the agricultural interests that they need to address unsustainable groundwater pumping that is damaging the Delta system itself. So our position really is, I mean, I hate to say it so bluntly, but if considering the benefit or the lack of benefit we have from this project, if somebody else is willing to pay for it, we'll pay for some of it. We understand the importance of regional needs, that just because it may not benefit always us directly, that the benefit of having a reliable system to the state as a whole is important. But we have to be careful not to take on a disproportionate amount of that cost. And so that's where a lot of our pushback is right now. All right. So we have these slides presentation from the Department of Water Resources. And what I did is I just snipped a few of these slides just for some information that came from them. And so this is really a marketing campaign, for lack of a better word, from DWR. They are going to all the agencies, not just us, with this presentation promoting the project to try to get support for it. And so they're promoting, of course, the project benefits, which is water supply reliability and quality, to offset the negative impacts of climate change on water deliveries. I discussed that earlier about the concerns about if we get a rise in water levels and it starts to push the salty water further into the Bay Delta, we may lose the quality that we need of water that we pump out of the Delta into the conveyance systems that take that water down to Southern California. And they talk about the seismic reliability, which I addressed a little bit earlier. They've done a lot of project costing. They've done a cost estimate by a PhD professor from Berkeley, who has done this very detailed cost estimate along with the DWR folks themselves about what the cost will be. The number that comes from their paid for economist is that for every $1 spent, that there'll be a $2.20 gain. But like any big estimate, that it's based upon an enormous number of assumptions. And these are assumptions that have to basically hold over a 30-year or more time horizon. And we know just from our experience in San Diego County that we spent an enormous amount of money on reliability, building the desal plant, raising the San Vicente Reservoir, spending billions of dollars on our own, based upon assumptions that were in good faith made 20 years ago about the amount of water that our region is going to be consuming, and we were off by 50%. And now we are paying for the cost of all these enormous reliability systems based upon for water that we are now not using half of what we thought we were going to use. And now we have what are known as stranded assets, and we're paying for this reliability when it turns out we don't need as much reliability as we have now. And that's part of the dilemma we're having with our increasing rates. So the state's position is that even with the whether it's $20 billion or ultimately $40 billion, down the road, that it'll still give us a $2.20 gain. But again, that's based upon a lot of assumptions. And what Ann experienced, and she heard at that meeting that we went to, was us pretty aggressively challenging a lot of those assumptions. And I think I started it to a certain degree, because one of their big selling points is, look, right now we're getting about 2,560 TAF, which is 1,000 acre foot of water out of the system. Based upon climate change predictions and sea level rise, we're going to lose about 570,000 acre feet of water. That's a prediction. That's an assumption. That's a prediction. It may be right. It may not be right. Okay. And so because of that, they're saying we're going to lose a lot of water based upon sea level rise. And what this Delta Conveyance project will do, as I mentioned earlier, not only does it have the environmental aspect to it and the reliability aspect of it for seismic reasons, but it'll also add about 403,000 acre feet of more available water. Just the pumps we have now compared to these pipes that will be built will allow another 403,000 acre feet of water that'll come back of additional water into our system to make up the difference. Okay, so a lot of this $2.20 gain is based upon the assumption that we will economically benefit from not losing this water that we have. But the question I asked them is, number one, how confident are you about this number? And they said, well, we've ran sensitivity studies. If it's not this, it's that. If it's that. And if it's not 220, it'll still be 190 or it'll still be 170. But then I asked the question, how do you know that the state is going to even need this much water in 30 years? Because of our experience in San Diego is we made good faith but really bad assumptions about our water consumption needs here. And we're using less water. In San Diego County alone, per capita, we're using 40% less water than we used 20 years ago per person. We have a lot of conservation programs still in effect. We just passed a law and regulations that are kicking in that are going to require agencies and people to use less water indoors, less water outdoors. And so what if we build this $40 billion project and in 2040, we don't really need this much more water? What have you done? And basically I don't know what you heard, Ann, but I didn't hear an answer. They didn't do a sensitivity study on consumption. They admitted that they're relying upon water projections that are 5 years old that we already know are outdated. And I said, well, have you done a new study based upon what we think are going to be the real needs? The answer, there was really no answer. I think the answer is no. Plus, we have these huge water reuse projects. Used to be called toilet to tap. Now it's water reuse. Yeah, and we already know about the one in San Diego that's being built right now that's going to supplement 30 to 40% of all the imported water is now going to be reused water in San Diego County. And Los Angeles is proposing a project that's going to be just as big. So when their reuse project kicks in and our reuse project kicks in, we're not going to be, our demand is going to be lower. So I think that's a big problem. And I think that they don't really have a good answer for that. This is a chart that they provided that basically, based upon those assumptions, what the cost per acre foot is going to be for the DCP project, the Delta Conveyance DCP project, which they claim from their, this thing keeps on buzzing at me here, will cost about $1,325 additional cost per acre foot. And they compared that to the cost of desal, which they say would be about $3,000, to the cost of recycling, which at a low would be less than that, to basically using stormwater for recharge, which would be less than that, and water conservation, which could be less than that. So they say overall that they think that it's still a good deal, a good price compared to, for example, the desal. That if you use this trend line, it's that this is at the lower end. Again, that's based upon all the assumptions of cost, and that everything is going to hold, and that their actual cost of this project will hold. We know from, for example, the rail project that is still not built, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, those numbers don't already hold. So there's a real concern down here that this project, if the costs get out of control, we could be doubling or tripling the cost of imported water, that our rates could double just from this project alone if it gets out of control. Again, their position is that we'll have a 22% reduction in deliveries by 2070. That's assuming that their climate predictions are right and that we don't need as much water. They talk about the direct impacts being reduced reliability, the potential of water shortages, the risk of major seismic disruption, and expensive alternative supplies such as desal. Indirect impacts that they have not evaluated is what's going to be the impact on our rates. They say that this will be a lower impact than others. We're not so sure about that. Certainly, if we do lose reliability, and they're right, we could have employment and economic activity issues if we don't have as much water. Prices could be higher for food if water costs more for the agricultural interests, and depletion of groundwater sources if there's more water to need to pump for groundwater. So their position is that there'll be a $38 billion project benefit. And then, so this gets to the concerns raised, and I'm almost done. We're almost at the end of the presentation here. Concerns raised at the County Water Authority to the DWR representatives. The first, and I've talked about it some, is the accuracy of the water demand projections. What if we end up not having to replace all or most of the projected loss that's going to come from climate change? Then the cost-benefit ratio significantly changes. And this scenario is really not being addressed in our view. The final project cost. In 2020, it was $16 billion. In 2023 dollars, it went up to $20 billion. What's it going to be in 25, in 30, in 40? And believe me, I love the high-speed rail project. I love the idea of having that, but we have to be realistic about what happens to some of these projects and how they get out of control. And Jane, I see your hand there. I hope I haven't ignored it for too long. Sorry about that. What we call is the high-speed rail post-traumatic stress disorder. It might even not be post, it's the current traumatic stress disorder. When we voted and approved this project in 2008, it was a $33 billion estimate for the entire project. In 2010, it went up to $64 billion. In 2020, it went up to $100 billion. In 2023, it went up to $88 to $128 billion. Now that project is funded by bonds and general obligations. This project is going to be funded by the ratepayers. What happens if we have some similarity to this project going out of control when they start trying to bury 45 miles of pipe at 150 feet? We don't know. There's a lot of risks there. And the original completion of the date of the high-speed rail system was projected at 2020. Right now, they're saying that the Central Valley section won't be done until the 2030s. So a lot of people bring up the high-speed rail project, not to bash that project, but to point out the fact that it's not a gimme that these projections right now are going to hold. Jane, your question?
Yes. So I'm relatively new to California, and
Okay.
I was wondering if there would ever be some kind of a bond measure to pay for this, or a ballot question. Why wouldn't there be, as opposed to having it paid through the ratepayers?
Well, the political answer is it would lose. I don't think anybody would want to put this before the voters because of the cost involved and the opposition historically from Northern California. And the other issue with bonds is this would be an enormous bond, and it doesn't benefit everyone in the state. Those who benefit from the state water project, but a lot of people in Central California, a lot of people that live, and there's a lot of people that live above above the Bay Delta who wouldn't benefit from this project, and other regions that would say, what's in it for us? So I think that the only really political way to do this is for this to be funded by those who are going to be using the money. Yeah.
Is there a sort of drop dead date in between now and 2044 when the project would have to either go forward or not?
No, not really. This project has been on, forms of this project, as I talked about earlier, has been on the books since since 1960. The only thing that is really the concern is that how long is it going to be before that big earthquake happens, or before climate change happens and we get what is the predicted rise in sea levels that starts having these impacts? And is this project going to stay ahead of it or not? Or do we look for other alternatives?
Yeah, I've just one more question.
Of course.
So your opponent in the election today, does that person have a particularly different point of view than you do on this project?
I don't know. I don't think that he's well.
Not that you know of.
I'll speak frankly. I don't think he has a clue about this.
Okay.
Okay. I think if you asked him a question about the Delta Conveyance Project, he'd ask, "What is that?"
Okay, that's fine.
Right. So it's something that a lot of people do have opinions about, and frankly, I'm still listening. I'm in what I call the hunting and gathering phase of really informing myself about it. Having the project has a lot of benefits to the state, to the region, to reliability, to all the things we've talked that were on that pro list. The question, especially looking at it regionally down here in Southern California, you may get very different points of view from your league folks up in Northern California about it, or from your league folks in LA, because people have different points of view. Down here, I think our real concern is not that there isn't benefit to it, but who's going to bear the cost of it? And is the cost something that at this point is the best way to solve these problems, or are there other alternatives that are available that maybe can solve it for at less risk? And that gets us to this affordability issue. Who's going to pay for it? The ag versus the urban users. Huge costs will pass through the ratepayers. Are there other ways that we can provide cost-effective conveyance at costs that are proportionate to the benefits? And those are all things that we're all just grappling with, and that we're still trying to figure out what's the best trade-off on all of this. Anne, you have a question?
Yeah. The other thing that I personally think is not being considered correctly is if we have, and we will have, aridification, that means we will have a lot less snow, which means we're going to have a lot less water coming down the Sacramento River. And the correlation between less water and this tunnel is very hard for me to correlate, because I just don't understand how you would possibly think we're going to get more water if there's less water in our future. I think people are relying on the atmospheric rivers to help us, but those are shifting. That's not a guarantee forever at all. Supposedly they're shifting northward. And
well, and the answer there was actually, that question was asked, I believe, in there, and the answer that DWR gave was, well, yes, we're going to have less snowpack, but we're not going to have less precipitation, they claim.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they say, well, we're not going to have less water. It's just all going to come at one time, as opposed to being held in snowpack and coming out over time as the snowpack melts. But I heard that, and everything that I was taught about the value of the snowpack, that sounds I'm really interested in how they come to that conclusion. But you're
Yeah.
right, and that's part of the whole crystal balling this thing, right? Because we
Exactly.
just don't know. Everything here is so based upon assumptions of what's really going to happen and how drastically it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And once this project is committed to, there's no turning back. It's not going to be us who are going to be having to pay the bill on this. It's going to be, and not even our kids, it's going to be our grandkids and our great grandkids who are going to be looking at paying the cost of these projects, and just hope with your fingers crossed that everybody's right. And in 2044 or 2050, when it's done, that all of that money that was spent that it was actually needed. And is there a way to do it in a more look at how to deal with these issues in a more holistic way? And I'll finish with this. Talked about the alternatives. So this is part of the debate. Okay, I have no answer for this. This is part of the big debate still. Okay, can the money be better used for conservation? Can we still conserve more so we don't need to build this big project for those times when we need that extra water? The water reuse projects, do we put the money into bigger reuse projects so that we are more conservative in our use of water and the recycling of water for potable use, not just to put on people's landscape or homeowners associations landscapes? Is targeted desalination. That was brought up, I think, Jim Medaffer, I think, asked that question. Desal can be very expensive, but can we have, if you're going to be spending $40 billion, do you spend a couple of $1 billion for some targeted desal plants to cover certain areas to mitigate some of the loss? Or should the money be better spent to improve the levee system so we have better conveyances and less loss of water coming down from Northern California? My last point, and this is kind of an area that bothers me. The state seems to lack taking a holistic review and approach toward this thing. All these projects are in their little silos. You've got the Delta Conveyance Project, and that gets studied, and it's in its bubble. Okay, you got the site's revenue and the billions of dollars going to be spent for that, and everybody looks at it. People look at it in their bubble, and they have the people who want that project. You got these huge water reuse projects that are being proposed in LA and in the Southern California region. And no one seems to be looking at the big picture and saying, okay, let's start doing some balancing here, and long term, what do we really need? Everybody just has their own pet projects. They're the shiny thing that they want. And, it seems like we need to look at the big picture of the revenues, the water reuse project, conservation. We got these new water mandates. And it really bothers me that there seems to be no desire to look at it and have kind of a czar, so to speak, of water. And maybe it's just politically impossible to do. I don't know. To say, let's look at all these projects as a whole and how can we balance this out for everybody? So I'm hoping that maybe that's something down the road that we can maybe get to. And whether this project will ever happen, it's failed many, many times. There have been many, many tries. Governor Newsom is the latest to try it. And we'll just have to wait and see in the next couple of years if it gets enough traction and there's enough political willingness to spend that money. And so with that, I'm left to take any other comments or questions.
Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to make sure. I think Connie is, Connie, did you have any questions?
I do. If the Delta Conveyance doesn't go forward, there's still big issues with the Bay Delta. What then?
What then? And that would then go to the questions of improving the levee system so that you can have your earthquake resilience through a better improved levee system. That would be about a $3 billion project to improve the levee system and have your resilience there. It doesn't necessarily answer the question, though, and it's a good one, Connie, about what we do with sea level rise. And if the predictions are correct that we're going to get more and more brackish water, what do we do about the quality of the water? Is there a way that rather than building a whole new pipeline, that we can have a treatment plant that for less than for a couple of $1 billion, $1 billion here, $1 billion there, to treat that water if the quality of it is degrading before it comes to us? Do you look at it that way? What are those alternatives? And then on the environmental issues, the Bay Delta smelt. And so you're absolutely right. There's a lot of good reasons to have this project, a lot of good reasons to be in favor of a project like this. The question is, how do you pay for it? And are there alternatives that in the long run might be better if we can conserve and just use less water, and so that the need of it isn't as high? That's what we're going to have to grapple with in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Neal? Then Neal, thank you so much. You're welcome to stay if you want, but I'm happy that we've been able to provide you with at least an hour of not thinking about what the voting is doing out there to you.
Right. Well, I've got another 4 hours before the polls even close. So
Oh, I know. I'm sorry we couldn't provide you with more time, but we have a few things we have to get organized.
Absolutely. And I know you need to get on moving. So thank you for the invitation, but yes.
Neal, is it okay if I share your PowerPoint with the whole group?
Absolutely. I have no problem at all. And
it'll be in the film too. So if there's anything in there you don't like, you better fix it because it's going out.
Yeah, well, hopefully I didn't say anything that I'm going to get in trouble about.
I don't think you are. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thanks,
We really
everybody.
appreciate
Nice
it.
y'all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.